The topics that we will be talking about in today's newscast will be about World War II, the Cold War, civil rights, Vietnam War era, the Nixon administration, and conservative tide on Ronald Reagan.
Dictators controlled most of Europe during the start of the Second World War. Mussolini was able to take control of Italy during the depression that hit Europe after World War I. People were looking for a strong leader that could save them. While they needed control, Mussolini turned it into a police state with the fascist regime. The rights of the people were taken, and anyone who opposed them were silenced. Hitler took a similar form of action to gain control of Germany at a time when people needed a change from the current form of government. Hitler was able to gain the following of the Germans with promises of getting the land lost in World War I. He used Jews as a scapegoat and his Nazi regime to keep order in Germany. The Holocaust was the systematic persecution of 6 million Jews and a slew of others that Hitler determined to be undesirable. He limited the rights of the Jewish people with the Nuremberg laws. There were anti-Semitism laws that limited the rights of the Jews until they were no longer citizens. They were required to live in ghettos which were almost unlivable. Many starved to death and got sick. Hitler believed that the Aryan race was the pure race and that everyone else was tainting the world. Many Jews tried to escape Europe, however, the unfortunate were sent to concentration camps. Millions of people were killed, including Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies. As the end of the war neared, prisoners were led on death marches, and many died before the liberation in 1945.
The Cold War was an ideological conflict that came after World War II. The seeds for this conflict started at the Yalta Conference. What had happened in the Yalta Conference was a promise made by Stalin to Roosevelt. The promise was to allow people of Russia and Poland to vote freely. However, in July 1945, Stalin refused this comment. In the same conference, the United Nations realized that out of all the countries that was involved in the war, the Soviets suffered the most. They were the most crippled, there was famine, loss of 2 million people, half were civilians, and they were low on money. The Soviets occupied the land that became known as the Satellite Nations. Due to the Soviets' response, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill made a speech called the Iron Curtain, which talked about separating Europe from the communist lands, which Stalin saw as a call to war. America responded to Stalin's choice with a policy called containment. The first action was to prevent other countries from falling into communism. The Truman Doctrine, which gave Greece and Turkey aid in the economy and military, set the standard on how containment would be enacted. There was $400 million put into this. The Marshall Plan gave 16 countries $13 billion in aid for a time period of 4 years. This led the idea of communism to grow in popular. In the year 1957, when Eisenhower was in power, the ruler of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, attempted to create more tension between the Soviets and Americans by improving relations with each nation in order to receive more money. When this news was released, Britain and the U.S. stopped funding Egypt's construction of a dam, which led Nasser to nationalize the Suez Canal. This resulted with France and Britain going to war with Egypt, but was quickly stopped by the United Nations. Egypt got to keep the canal. This caused the Middle East to favor communism. However, Eisenhower created the Eisenhower Doctrine, which said that the U.S. would defend the Middle East against an attack by any communist countries. Back home, the fear of communism was everywhere, and the media was not seen as a friend. There was suspicion that ideas of communism were displayed on TV shows and movies. Due to the increase of fear, the House of Un-American Activities Committee was created to investigate the assumed communist films. They ended up finding 43 witnesses, only 10 refused to talk. These 10 became known as the Hollywood 10, for they refused to talk. Majority of these actors found these hearings unconstitutional, which led them into prison. The Hollywood 10 event ended up helping create the blacklist, a list of people whom the HUCA assumed had communist backgrounds, including the other 33 actors. There was a total of 500 actors, writers, producers, and directors on that list. Because of this, their career was ruined. They were removed from their profession.
I'm going to show you how McDonald's builds a Big Mac sandwich. It starts here with a lightly toasted bun, and then a pure beef hamburger, sizzling hot. a slice of cheddar blend cheese, and some crisp, fresh lettuce. Then, our own secret sauce. The club slice, toasted. Another hamburger. And a little more sauce just for good flavor. Crisp dill pickles and the sesame seed crown. This is the sandwich. McDonald's new Big Mac sandwich for the bigger than average appetite. McDonald's is your kind of place.
Slavery in America ended in 1865, and although African Americans were free, they were not equal. In 1914, blacks and whites were separated by Jim Crow laws. They were a series of laws that created a racial caste system in our own backyard. Blacks were not permitted in the same areas as whites. Their schools, theaters, rail cars, and waiting rooms were all separate. Civil rights activists used nonviolent protests and civil disobedience to bring about change. One such speaker, Martin Luther King, was able to lead a movement of peace, while others like Malcolm X took a more radical approach. We were a following of people, blacks and whites alike, to strike change. It was a movement that people of all ages took part in. The youth of the time had a large role in the movement. Groups and organizations such as FOR, SCLC, and CORE all had a large part in the movement. They promoted change in a peaceful way.
One major issue for the civil rights movement was the education system. The National Association of Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, fought against the separate but equal system. They stated it was in fact unequal and that all children deserve the right to a unsegregated education. In 1954, the landmark case of Brown versus the Board of Education, Thurgood Marshall, the case's leader for the Brown family, won the court ruling. The court ruled that on May 17th, saying that separate but equal facilities were inherently unequal. However, even after this, black students were still met with violent protests against them. In August 1957, the Little Rock Nine had the opportunity to go to Central High School where they received an unsegregated education. They were met on the first day of school with so much violence that President Eisenhower had to send a federal escort so that the students may be let in. Many more students would experience this de facto segregation throughout the civil rights movement. The Vietnam conflict began on November 1st, 1955. During the Vietnam War, about 2/3 of the American troops were volunteers. The rest were selected for the military service through the drafts. From the beginning of the war, names of all American men in draft age were collected by the Selective Service Act. When your name was called, you had to report to your local draft board, which is made up of various community members, so they could evaluate you for your service. The local draft boards had an enormous power to decide who would go and who would stay. Consequently, draft board members were often under pressure from their families, relatives, and friends to exempt potential draftees. According to the National Archives, approximately 27 million American men eligible for military service between 1964 and 1973. The draft raised 2,215,000 men for military service. Around 15.4 million were granted deferments for education or for mental, physical, and family hardships. More than 300,000 were deserters, and 209,515 were illegally resisted the draft. Some 100,000 deserted again. Among them, around 30,000 immigrated to Canada during 1966 through 72. Many of these people tried to immigrate away, as previously stated. Also including those in college were initially exempt from the draft. This number of drafts led to the hippie movement. American involvement in the Vietnam conflict was highly controversial and sparked 10 years of unrest and protests, and remained forever in the hearts and minds of the American people. The war by many was thought as a very bad idea, as it brought violence back to the peaceful Americas. Many Americans were in favor of sending troops, however, in the beginning, though towards the end of the war, they decided that it would be not worth it. Hawks are one of the groups that split America into two divisions. Hawks believed that they needed to unleash the full military power of America onto Vietnam and help contain communism. Doves, however, were against the war and wanted the United States to withdraw and leave Vietnam to sort out its own war. On the Vietnam front, troops were not liked by the civilians, and many were often from the working class who weren't able to attend college for financial reasons. Racism was also evident in the military units, leading to low morale. The Nixon administration began in 1968 and would end in 1974, but would forever impact the United States. Nixon was part of a new conservative era, focusing on the silent majority, in which he instituted the idea of New Federalism. New Federalism was to distribute a portion of federal power to the state and local governments. This idea impounded many social programs in the nation. Nixon fought to establish order in a war-torn nation and fought the stagnated and inflated economy with little success. Nixon again showed failure when he slowed the racial integration of schools. However, Nixon enjoyed much success in the foreign scene, where he eased Cold War tensions and signed arms treaties, as well as removed forces from Vietnam. Nixon's downfall came in the form of a scandal called Watergate. Within Nixon's administration, an inner circle existed to consolidate power for the White House. Burglars broke into the Watergate complex to photograph and bug it, and were led by the security coordinator of the committee to re-elect the president. Nixon's personal downfall would come when he attempted to cover up the scandal, as he was deeply involved in its creation. He altered evidence before giving it to the court and resigned before his impeachment could be implemented. The Watergate scandal and Nixon's administration created deep mistrust for the government, which continues even today. The United States of America would forever be impacted by the rise of conservatives. The conservative upsurge had many sources, a large group of fundamentalist Christians who regarded the Bible as the direct word of God. They had many galvanizing issues, but the most controversial would forever be abortion. New Right favored strict limits on government intervention in the economy. They also stressed family values. President Reagan's unflagging optimism and his ability to spread the achievements and aspirations of the American people would cement him into the American office. Reagan believed that the government intruded too deeply into the American life. He wanted to cut programs that he did not see fit for the country by eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. Reagan thoroughly pursued deregulation, more than even Jimmy Carter. Reagan sought to eliminate workplace regulations. One of Reagan's major concerns was the economy. Reagan's economic policies became known as Reaganomics. They consisted of three parts: budget cuts, tax cuts, and increased defense spending. Part of these budget cuts was to the healthcare field and Environmental Protection Agency. They resulted in the explosion of the AIDS crisis and horrendous amounts of pollution and environmental destruction. Reagan's cuts to the welfare program and use of supply-side economics, which is the lowering of income tax with the hope of saving money, backfired spectacularly. With his increased defense spending, like the Strategic Defense Initiative, known as Star Wars, resulted in the doubling of the national debt by the end of his first term. Reagan succeeded in the swing of the Supreme Court to a conservative court, and appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to the court. Despite Reagan's doubling of the national debt, by the end of Reagan's second term, he had expanded the economy to the strongest it had ever been, and his increased defense spending helped in the collapse of the Soviet Union.